It's upside down and inside out. Happiness, sadness, no pain. I've seen a lot of faces and I've been a lot of places. When are things ever gonna change? Open your eyes, don't you tell me no lies, that you can't feel the children's pain.
I'm an attorney by profession, and I have met many homeless families, and I'm deeply concerned about what has happened to them over the last couple of months since the changes in the DHCD regulations. The current regulations and the way they're being implemented put homeless children in serious danger. Under current DHCD regulations, for many families, there is a requirement that they have to sleep in a place not meant for human habitation before they could get into shelter. I'd like to say that again slowly. Homeless children and their parents are required under the current regulations, many of them, to sleep in a place not meant for human habitation. That's the regulations now. That's a prerequisite. You might want to know how that's working out on a practical level.
Dr. Robert Sagan, a pediatrician at Boston Medical Center and director of the Division of Family and Child Advocacy at Boston Medical Center. I'm here to tell you about the experience of pediatricians and just to give a little flavor to what we're dealing with right now. Right now, there's a Boston Medical Center patient who has sickle cell disease, which makes this young child very prone to hypothermia. Being cold causes sickle cell crises. This child went to DHCD today with an attorney and a letter saying about his condition and asking for reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disability Act. And that was turned down because the child is not actually homeless yet. And they want this child to spend the night in the car before they'll do that. This child might die if he gets hypothermia. So if I'm a little emotional about all this is what we're dealing with. I have two letters. The first is from myself and 8 other physicians who practice in Eastern Massachusetts. We want to express our concern about the changes in emergency assistance regulations regarding emergency shelter. We have begun to see cases of families with young children who are desperate, have no place to go, and are being denied emergency shelter under the new regulations. These families are showing up in our emergency departments and primary care clinics. We want DHCD to change the regulations so the children will have the opportunity to have placement when they're at imminent risk of living in places that's unfit as opposed to one that's already unfit.
My name is Ivory Husker. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. After staying with these 2 friends, I ran out of options. We had to sleep in my mother's car. I drove into a park near Gurney Hospital. I was familiar with that area of the park and thought it was the safest place to spend the night. My children shared the back seat. They were crying, confused, and upset. They were scared because it was so dark. I tried comforting them, and I too was scared. We are fortunate and thankful that we do now have shelter. However, I am here to ask that DHCD please change their new regulations to prevent families like mine from having to sleep in cars or parks or bounce from one house to another. No child or family should ever have to go through that.
I ended up being homeless from fleeing a domestic violence relationship with my husband. A friend put us up for a little while, but it became overwhelming for her. At that time, because I had been staying at a friend's house, they told me that they couldn't help me. They said that they couldn't help me because I had a roof over my head, that I had somewhere to stay because I had been sleeping at a friend's house.
I see. But in fact, you couldn't stay with your friend anymore because that was no longer tenable. So what did you do next?
I tried to find other places to stay, which I wasn't successful. So me and my son wound up sleeping in my car. We slept in the car for a couple of weeks. In between me sleeping in the car, I went back down there to apply again and let them know that my living arrangements have changed and I was now sleeping in my car with my son. At this point, they told me that they would send someone out to investigate to make sure that I was staying in my car.
And did anyone from the state actually come to investigate your living arrangements?
No, they didn't. Almost a week went by and no one showed up.
I begged them. I told them, look at me and look at my daughter, for God's sake. I have no else to go. That day I slept in South Station with my daughter in the stroller, without taking a bath, without brushing my teeth, without nothing to eat. A guy approached me with a Happy Meal, and I was crying, and I explained to him what happened, and then he left. He said, oh, I hope things work out. The next day, I was at the South Station again. I spent the day walking up and down, trying my options. After that, he approached me again, and that night, he told me, oh, you can stay at my house until you figure things out. Honestly, in that moment, I didn't have another option. My daughter was tired to be all day in the stroller. I didn't take bath in days. So I said yes. I took the train down to his house, bus. As soon as I got to his house, he raped me next to my daughter.
In the last 6 weeks, we have seen a sharp increase in the number of women seeking shelter at our morning lottery, having left their children with family and friends. Women and young children visiting Rosie's Place during the day after being denied shelter by DHCD and being told that Rosie's Place would help them. Homeless mothers calling my overnight staff from hospital emergency rooms in the middle of the night, and calls from other providers looking for advice for the homeless families sitting in their reception halls. Specifically, during the last 7 days alone, we have provided services to a woman who was told to leave the DHCD office by a security guard because her baby was crying because she ran out of milk. The guest was denied shelter by the receptionist. Provided shelter to a woman who had asked her sister to care for her son while she is homeless. Talked to a woman via telephone at 11:30 p.m. who was calling from the BMC emergency room where she and her toddler were sleeping. And I listened to these stories all day. What a disaster this is. Pretending there are fewer homeless people because you are letting fewer homeless people into shelter is shameful.
My name is Eric Hirsch. Many people would say I'm an expert on housing first. I followed the family shelter crisis here in Massachusetts, and I'm quite familiar with the situation that many families are facing. I think I understand what is happening here. And the idea is that you are trying to move to a housing-based system and not a shelter-based system. I spend much of my life, literally, trying to implement this approach in Rhode Island. There's only one problem. You don't have the housing to implement it. Doubling up, I think you're thinking doubling up is a solution. If that's a solution, why do 1 in 12 doubled up families wind up homeless compared to 1 in 200 in the general population? It's a road to homelessness. It is certainly not anything remotely like a stable housing situation. You need to relax the shelter restrictions till you have the housing resources. You don't have the housing resources. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Kelly Curry. I'm Director of Legislative Advocacy at the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless, and also like to echo the gratitude of my fellow panelists for your willingness to be here and be in Springfield on Monday to take our comments on the emergency assistance regulations and to really engage in this dialogue. I hope that we can move from dialogue to concrete action to concrete change. I want to present to you a letter signed by 69 groups across the state that represent advocacy groups, providers, legal services, medical community, domestic violence service community, faith communities, and various community groups to ask you in particular to adopt our recommended language around imminent risk of having to stay in a place not meant for habitation. We've talked about it time and time again today, so I don't have to get into the details of what that proposal would be, but I really hope that we can continue the dialogue outside of Gardner Auditorium to talk about ways where the Department of Children and Families, the Department of Housing and Community Development, community groups who are working with these families and seeing them in the ER, hearing from them while they're staying in their car, talking to them the morning after they stayed on the beach, to be able to identify families who we know are heading into those situations so they don't have to head there. And I know that as a creative and compassionate Commonwealth, we can come to a resolution. We'll continue day in and day out to be up here at the State House asking for more resources for affordable housing and prevention, which we know that we need to be able to really get to the roots of this problem. But in the meantime, I ask you once again to not remove the safety net of shelter with just the promise or the hope of affordable housing. That together we need to make that happen. In the meantime, we need to protect the safety net, and I know that we can do it. Thank you.
Soy víctima de violencia doméstica
I'm a victim of domestic violence.
y esta es mi
Muchas
historia.
veces no me daba para darles lo que ellos necesitaban, como ropa, zapatos.
A lot of times she didn't have enough to do.
I stayed in my mother's van in the parking lot outside the apartment.
Me and my family became homeless about 6 months ago.
Homelessness does not take all day, and so we spent Labor Day weekend in vehicles. My children and I did not have a place to stay that night, so waiting until tomorrow was not an option.
Stress, anxiety.
It's upside down and inside out. Happiness, sadness, no pain. I've seen a lot of faces and I've been a lot of places. When are things ever gonna change? So open your eyes, don't tell me no lies, that you can't feel the children's pain. So open your eyes, don't tell me no lies, that you can't feel the children's pain.